What's up, everybody? It's Quentin from Hunters of Light, and today we've got an interesting profession. I think all of us want to use photography as our means of earning an income, and some of us even get the luxury of being able to do that, and then you get the next level where you get to become a wildlife guide and take people out, shooting and showing them what's out there and teaching them how to do it for a living. I think that's that for a lot of us would be the ultimate, other than owning a catamaran and sailing around the Caribbean. But that's another story on its own. So so today we've got Andrew Beck, who's going to be taking us through his story, the life of a wildlife photography guide. And as I said, I think that would be amazing. Just going around shooting wildlife in the bush. Guests thinking you're amazing because you've taught them this new skill. So yeah, welcome. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us today.
No, thanks so much for the opportunity, Quentin. I must say, last year it was a lot more exciting than it is this year, given all the travel restrictions and everything. But yeah, in essence, there certainly are worse professions in the world, and yeah, it's just I'm very blessed to have followed the path that I have to get to this point. Yeah, so thank you very much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. You showed me a slide which you're going to show everyone else later on today about the different places you've been to this year. But maybe if you want to just start off with how you got into photography and becoming a photography guide.
Yeah, well, maybe, the start actually came for me. My background and first passion was conservation. So I studied at varsity for a total of 10 years between Pretoria Technikon and then Wits University, where I ended up finishing up with a master's degree. But in that time, I was guiding and working at Madikwe Game Reserve during some of the part-time studies as well. So that really gave me first-hand experience of being a guide on the ground. So a jeep jockey, for lack of a better term. But that's really where I cut my teeth. And it was during that period that I was helping guests with their camera. And I'm a self-taught photographer. So, thousands of frames, just understanding what is aperture, what is exposure compensation. And that may seem quite basic for a lot of people, but what that's done is it's put me in a very good position to actually relate and help people to cement those kind of concepts. And then essentially what we do is we do that in the most incredible environments. So rather than in a studio, we go off to the Masai Mara or we go to the Okavango Delta and help people learn whilst on safari.
Absolutely, and I think one of the most important skills for a photographer that deals with people is the understanding and the empathy of what it is that they're going through. I've said it before, where if you're a portrait photographer, you need to get your portrait taken, because there's nothing quite like the abject panic that you have when you're sitting there and someone is saying, oh, move your head to the left, to the right, keep going, and you start, but unless you've been through that, it's you can't really take people through that the process and make them feel comfortable. So absolutely, the fact that you've done it definitely helps. It's a good skill to have.
Two things there. I think the one is that the best part about wildlife photography is you don't have someone coming to look at the camera afterwards and say,
yes.
I'm not so happy with that
and if
shot.
I like
so that's
that
the
shot,
first thing. So they don't talk back, which is fantastic. They don't listen either. But the second important part that you mentioned there is their empathy. And so, what you're going to see today, some of the images and that sort of stuff, is just really a tiny percentage of what it is to be a wildlife photographic guide. It's early mornings, it's long days from, half an hour before the guests come through for coffee, making sure that the coffees are prepped, making sure all the dietary requirements are taken care of, full days out on safari, lightroom sessions in between safari, hosting dinner in the evenings. And, all of our guides from their background have all come from that guiding perspective. So just because you're a great photographer doesn't mean that you're, number one, able to teach, which is what we do. And number two, that you're able to host and create experiences for people. If you're not a people's person, being a wildlife photographic guide is probably not for you, because it's not actually about taking photographs. And maybe I can just get the prezzo going here for us so long. But the thing here is that it's really it's about the guests, guests first always. And so what I thought I'd do is just share some of my favorite images from this year. This year's been a particularly great year.
Very busy. I can see there's
very busy.
These images are not loading. This is not a case of we're waiting for the image to load.
They've been postponed into 2021. No, but with all jokes aside, I was actually fortunate enough to get 2 destinations in this year. So I went off to the Selous in Tanzania and Ruaha, as well as Odzala in the Republic of Congo. But yeah, I mean, this is a tough year, and travels for most people are very restricted at the moment and quite difficult. But essentially, you know, through this wildlife photographic industry, I've been fortunate enough to take guests around the world, meet incredible people, and share moments. But you know, the key thing that I wanted to mention was that, you know, I'm first and foremost, my background is in guiding. So understanding animal behavior is a huge thing for wildlife photographers, just like understanding people behavior is for portraits. But you know, so when we're out in the field, we're working with our local guides. We're not actually driving the vehicles and that sort of thing, but we're just as in tune with what's going on the ground as you were if you were the local guide. So helping from tracking, as you can see here, all the way through. And then one of the real benefits and a perk for me is I've been able to weave conservation into 1 or 2 of the safaris. So the image on the right there was taken just outside Wangi National Park, which for those of you who love lions, you would remember the Cecil saga where he was hunted on the edge of that reserve. And so, you know, we do a conservation safari out there, which looks at people, the community, as well as the wildlife. So a holistic approach to that. So I've been able to weave in some of my conservation background into what I do as well. But, you know, coming back to it, first and foremost, it's about the guest experiences. And I absolutely love being able to put people in positions like this on top of a ridge in Jataki Springs in Mana Pools National Park, sitting, waiting for a herd of close on 400 or 500 buffalo to come down and drink literally at the foot slopes beneath you. And having a guiding background is very important in this kind of creating this kind of experience for people.
Oh, that's very cool. Just something that we want to do from a sharing and liking and et cetera, et cetera. Andrew, I don't know if you want to take us through that.
Yes. Thanks for the reminder. So guys, what I thought we'd do is just to, as we go through this presentation, if you find images that really speak to you, do me a favor, go and grab them. If you're on Instagram, throw them up onto your story, tag the Hunters of Light, that's at Hunters of Light, and then tag myself at Andrew Beck SA. I'd love to see which images are your favorite. And I'll obviously reshare those and just try and get some more traction for this incredible community that Quentin has been building over this period and bringing entertainment and great value, hopefully, which I'm going to be bringing today to you guys. So yeah, so just back towards, you know, what I was saying is some of the experiences that we get, and experience is really at the heart of it. So whilst we are photographic guides and we're out there to get a photograph, you know, there are times where you've actually got to sit back, put the camera down and just soak up the experience. And especially when you're going to places like the Okavango Delta, or if you're tracking black rhino on foot, desert adapted black rhino here in Namibia, you know, you can get caught up in the moment that you're always behind that lens. You actually don't remember to stop and breathe and take it back. And I think that's where, from a guiding perspective, we're able to do that, to say to people, to encourage people to actually just sit back and soak up the experience. Whether you're, you know, lying flat on your belly in water in the middle of the Congo photographing forest buffalo, or cruising through a Mokoro in the Okavango Delta, the heart of it is about experiences and collecting memories that will last a lifetime, but with the added benefit of being able to get to know how to use your camera. So, you know, being able to get out with a small group like this in a controlled environment where it's safe, you've got a professional guide with you, and the kind of opportunities that you're able to capture whilst you're out on safari with us is really incredible. And the take-home message here is that for me, as a wildlife photographic guide, it's about guests first always. There's no shortage of stories where other guides have nudged guests out of the way to get a shot or will take prime position in a vehicle. That's really not what it's about for us. You'll notice we don't sell prints or anything like that. That's not our profession. We're in the business of creating memories and helping people to capture those memories for themselves. So I thought, Quentin, as we go along, I thought I could also just share two of my kind of favorite themes. And I would say, you know, everyone kind of looks for a style or a preference, you know, your signature kind of shot. And for me, there's two themes that stick out. And this I like to share a lot with guests when we're out on safari. And the first one is these biased interpretations. You know, I'm a firm believer that you can either represent a scene. So you can literally take a photograph of what you see, or you can create your own biased interpretation of that, which may not be immediately obvious, but it gets people to think. The phrase that I like to use for this is the abstract extracts, because it's a little bit different. And so a classic example of this would be, turning the Namib landscape into almost like a lunar type feeling. So it feels like you're flying over the moon, when it's actually, in fact, the Namib desert, which in many places and many respects actually is quite a lunar landscape in itself. And I think one of the things that people immediately think about when it comes to these abstract extracts is slow shutter speed. So intentional camera movement, panning at low light. If you're stuck with an old camera which doesn't do well in low light and shooting at high ISOs, don't fight the light. Just drop the ISO, use that slow shutter speed to create something different. One of my colleagues always says, the world doesn't need sharper images. And for a lot of people, that really is the focus, is how sharp is this shot. Another classic example here, Quentin seems to have dropped off, but I'm just going to continue running, hoping that things are running smoothly here. But, just going in a little bit tighter, creating something different, abstract images from an ice flow here in Svalbard. And again, another slow shutter pan with the aquatic grasses in the Okavango Delta. So rather than just representing a scene, is creating something a little bit different. And that doesn't always mean that you have to get creative with the tech that you have. It may just mean being at the right place, the right time. And so Quentin is back. And so a classic example here is first light in Amboseli. So backlit, these elephants love this short synchronous grass. And as they pluck this grass out, the fine sand, Amboseli, coming from the Maasai word impasil, which means dust. And this is an iconic shot for me from Amboseli. So I like to look for different kind of images, not just your stock standard, hey, here's a lion. And sometimes that means getting in a little bit tighter, using converters, going into 800 mils and just deconstructing a scene. That's a big word in the food industry, isn't it? You've got to kind of deconstructed apple crumble, which basically means the chef's dropped it on the floor and you've got to put it all together.
Scraped it back up,
yeah, exactly. But, so I like to go outside of the box. I'm not just looking for a stock standard line portrait. I want to break it down, look for something a little bit different. Try and create images that convey a sense of what you're experiencing. So for example, this is a river crossing in the Masai Mara. And for those of you who have been, it is utter chaos when you've got a couple of thousand wildebeest trying to cross through a river. There's crocodiles. And, so again, a little bit of slow shutter speed with intentional movement to kind of create the sense of chaos. So as a viewer, your eye kind of gets left to wander around the scene, and it creates a sense of chaos within you. And then on the flip side of that, just looking at patterns and textures within nature. This is in the Hoenap Valley in Namibia. So the stark contrast of this very white sand and a dune that was running across this. And that edge is exactly that. This is not a composite, it's not Photoshop. It's obviously just been cropped, from corner to corner to emphasize that. But I like to look for these kind of more abstract images.
I think it's pretty cool where, you get the shot, but you then push it a little bit further. It's one of the more difficult things to sort of say, well, how can I shoot this in a different way? And the more that you push yourself doing that, the more you're going to come up with, I suppose, more creative images and more representations of what it is. So it takes it from the standard shot to the feeling that you get when you're there,
Quite right. And, there's two aspects to that. The one is, as you pull into a sighting, you bank the safe shots, you get that. And once you've got that, don't just carry on shooting that same scene. Try different things, explore. But the other side of it, and what I often do is, you'll pull into a lion sighting and there's lions lying down and the guests get excited. They've got their cameras out and they start firing away. And you just kind of sit and watch, and you then ask, okay, so what is it that you guys are photographing? And they will kind of look at you and say, well, but there's lions. Yeah, but what are you photographing? Are you looking for interaction? Is there a cub involved? Is the cub going to potentially play and climb on dad? Are there fallen termite mounds or fallen trees or termite mounds around here? Because that's where the cubs could go next. Are you anticipating what can come? And so it's also about maybe thinking a little bit more and shooting a little bit less, but it depends where you are in your journey, because in the beginning stages, it's about shooting more and thinking less. finding the rules, finding the ways to break it. But I still maintain that editing starts here with the finger. I'm very much about getting it right in camera. And so, you know, shooting with something like the new 1DX3, for those of you who are not able to actually narrow down and decide when you're going to shoot with your 16 or 20 frames a second, you know, it can be quite daunting then to go through and decide which images are you going to actually use and choose. Those, you know, that frame rate is there for a specific moment to help you get that. You've got to make sure that you're pointing in the right direction, not with the sleeping lioness over here, but with the cubs who are playing over there. So understanding animal behavior is a huge part of what we do as well.
Absolutely. I wonder if there's a formula, you know, the once you've taken the 7,342nd image of a lion sleeping, that's the time when you start going, hold on a second, what else is there?
Yeah, I don't know what that is. And I think that's part of our responsibility as guides, is to try and fast track that progress. And I've seen it with a couple of guests who come in knowing absolutely nothing, been on a couple of safaris and have just have progressed so quickly through those stages, even to the point with, you know, purchasing their gear, where they will try certain combinations before actually purchasing. So that you're quite right. It is a process and a journey. And then the other thing that I really enjoy photographing is animals in their environment. And I think it's partially because of my background in conservation. You know, these protected areas are under threat, and you know, the last thing you want is for future generations to only be able to appreciate wildlife in very small and finite areas. So some of the places that I'm fortunate enough to visit with guests offer that opportunity to showcase these animals in their environment. And it's something that I find is quite difficult for photographers to do, wildlife photographers, because, you know, without the glass. So if you've got that 100 to 400, you bang that thing into 400 mils the whole time. You don't ever pull it back. I mean, why would you have it otherwise? You know, that sentiment from a wildlife photography of, you know, you've never got enough glass. You can always have more focal length. So it's something that I like to push, and it doesn't always mean pulling back. I mean, you know, scenes like this, yes, you could have a nice tight portrait and the, you know, the thinking pose and that sort of stuff with the tight portrait on the face could work. Just for me, this kind of speaks to the secret nature of it. You feel like you're a voyeur in this world, and you've been actually privileged to catch a glimpse into the world that this Western lowland gorilla finds itself. So I'm very much about using the environment to help me tell that story as well.
I really enjoy this one. The feeling that I get from it is like silence, you know, and I think the environment is what it does it for me. You know, it's the subject in the middle of a slightly bigger picture, and it's just quiet. For me, that's the feeling I get from this. It's just quiet.
I'm glad that you've got that. For me, it brings back memories, because you see those little sweat beads buzzing around the gorilla's head there. And those guys in the Congo, they're all over you because of the moisture and that sort of thing. So it's anything but silent in that moment. But you're quite right. You know, the actual story here is one of, you know, it's a pensive posture and just peace. And I think that, you know, that comes through in a lot of the images that I shows, that it's quite different. You know, having an elephant like this is a forest elephant, also in Odzala in the Congo. You know, when the elephant's standing and staring straight towards you, you know that you've been seen. You're documenting that. Whereas this, again, it's kind of a peaceful, observant structure. And one of the things that I absolutely love about this as a destination is that all of the photographs that we take here are on foot or from a boat. So in this particular image, I'm kind of sitting waist deep or chest deep in the water here. And for me, that's also something that I love, is the sense of adventure, being able to explore wild and remote areas. So yeah, the environments that I've been able to travel to, anyone who's watching will know that this is Mana Pools. You know, they can take on a life of their own. And the haziness that you see here is from the fires that burn in that Zambezi Valley in the later season. But it comes through and it adds quite an ethereal mood to the whole scene. And then, you know, just again, it's the little details, with that baboon being, you know, cast against a bright background. There's a point of contrast, the elephant looking across there, the impala on the left, and, you know, the balance and the framing of the trees. Love to use the environment to create frames. And it's very different, but it's very rewarding when you get it right.
Absolutely. I mean, I love the sense of scale there. You know, you can see all the elements and the trees so tall before you get to the leaves. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I absolutely love Quentin, and Mana Pools as a destination is one of those things where you the number of times I find myself saying, can you imagine if in there? And because of the stage is set, it's just about where the animals come. And there's often key light as well, which is great.
Yeah.
But, this is also just a typical Mana pool scene. But again, not going as tight as one would normally, just showing a little bit of sense. You've got the Zambezi Valley in the background, the Zambezi River, and then this beautiful light falling onto this young Ellie bull having a big stretch on a termite mound there. And again, tight portraits like this, I mean, a lion is a lion is a lion, unless you've got some sort of environment to kind of show where it's at. Is it in East Africa, the open grass plains? Is it in KZN somewhere? If you go in tight the whole time, it literally is just that. It's a lion, and it could be anywhere in the world. So I like to give a sense of space. And, the story behind these lions in Namibia, I mean, this was on a trip where this was an absolute highlight for us. We'd wanted to see these girls. They'd made a kill. They're actually looking past us to two youngsters that were sitting on the oryx kill. We spent 4 hours sitting with that oryx out in the open before the youngsters came out, and then these females eventually came and joined them. And I love having that, that moment where you build up a story in the field. And it could easily have happened that these females hadn't come out and that the cubs hadn't come out, and we'd have to drive back to camp. But, we invested time in the sighting. We weren't rushed. We weren't there to check off a list. We knew that there was a potential for photographic opportunities, and we spent some time there, and we really did get rewarded. If I continue just to evolve again, I love pattern and texture when you talk about the environment. And, palms in Africa, it just feels a little bit, out of place. Where was this? And this is obviously in the Okavango Delta. And interestingly, right now, the water is probably above where that lion's top of his mane is now, with the floodwaters that have pulled through there this year. But again, I just love the sense of texture, the sense of space, and the sense of place that this gives. And pulling back a little bit more rather than going right in tight with the stock standard portrait shot. And then obviously using some photographic techniques. So this is a pano of elephants in the Hona riverbed in Namibia as well. And, shooting panos now with the ability to stitch in Lightroom is so easy. So for those who have primes, or even something like 100 to 400, if you zoom in all the way to 400, you're going to be taking advantage of that shallower depth of field. And so rather than pulling back to 200 and shooting a scene, is go into 400, shoot in pano in portrait orientation, and take a couple of images and stitch them together. The difference in terms of the depth of field and obviously resolution, which doesn't really matter because you're just going to crunch them and put them onto Instagram in any case. But, using some of those techniques and encouraging people to think about those things. Don't just shoot at 200. Well, let's go in tighter. Look at the difference in the depth of field when you're able to shoot at 400 mils versus 200 mils. And then obviously with Lightroom, it's just so easy to pull these things together. But again, the story here is about a sense of place. I've also been very fortunate to fly over some of the places in the Delta and photograph hippos, things like Sitatunga, which is a very rare aquatic antelope, which I've seen a couple of times from a boat, but, from air, the opportunities are just next level. So for me, this is, one of my all-time favorite shots, because it's big, it's vast. And I think that's the challenge when you have animals in their environment, is the wider you go, the more potentially distracting elements you include in the frame. So here you've got this beautiful grass up at the top, uniform, and then, a bit of contrast down the bottom. So your subject, which is actually very, very small part of the frame, is still able to draw your eye and to anchor the shot from a contrast perspective, but you're free to explore the expanse and the scale of the rest of the frame.
Absolutely. I mean, I love the graphic nature of it. I suppose being an art director at heart, that's kind of part of what I'm looking for, and the sort of in situ or those type of shots. It gives you an opportunity to do that. There's one of the shots, I don't know if it's still coming, where it's a cheetah on a little mound in black and white, and it's just so like graphic and I love it. I think that when you're looking at wildlife photography, that's not really the feel that you get. You're looking more at close-ups and action and that sort of thing. And I really enjoy the more sort of graphic in situ type shots.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I thought you were starting off by saying you just want to put in a text block over there and have well, the creative in you, exactly. But you're right, Quentin. And I think there is a design element to it. And essentially, when you take a photograph, you've got to have a story. And there's certain elements that would have aligned in the frame to make that story. When you edit, your editing is aligned to that story. And so it should be able to enhance certain things and detract and, you know, push and pull your viewer's eye. If there's no story to begin with, then people just try and, you know, you're throwing the toolbox at it to try and bang something out. And that's where things go horribly wrong. I don't actually have that cheetah image, but it is on my Instagram feed. So if you guys want to go and check that out, you're welcome to. But again, stuff like this, you know, this is Amboseli. This is a dry lake bed, the lake bed of Amboseli. And again, spending time out here, the elephants do cross over, but I've been there and spent days where I haven't found an ellie coming across that pan. And then you get there and you find the clouds are aligning. And, you know, this is typical of Amboseli weather. You've got these bands of light moving across a landscape the whole time. I learned so much about exposure compensation and light in this destination. It is frightening. And it's one of my favorite places to go because, again, the safari takes on the pace of the subjects here. Your key focus is on these elephants, and you can spend hours just watching them wade through these marshes and seeing the light change. And it's a great place to use graduated filters, which is something that not a lot of wildlife photographers do. But for me, as a destination, Amboseli and grad filters, they go hand in hand with one another, and it really does open up opportunities. More examples just in Botswana, and, you know, things like this, the environments, you think, oh, hang on, a leopard is by shy, you know, it's shy and secretive in its nature. Here, you know, you've kind of got that. You get to feel that this leopard is slinking away. There's a bit of movement coming in from the top right of frame. And whilst it is undoubtedly about the leopard, the question should be, holy smokes, where was this? What is, you know, it's about the environment that it finds itself in. And from a kind of design perspective, it's very clean. There's no distracting elements, you know, just one branch, one tree, one patch of grass down at the bottom would have changed this whole scene, because then there's another point of contrast and your eyes fighting. It's something that I like to do is eye mapping. So if you close your eyes and you open your eyes again, and you've got to try and trace where your eyes go in the frame. And with a scene like this and with animals in environment, you've got to make sure that your editing is in line to pushing your viewer straight to that subject. You can't have them wandering too far. So I like to use a lot of subtle vignetting. You know, very subtle. If you have to ask me, oh, I like the way you've put the vignette in here, then it's too much.
It's too much, yeah.
But it makes a huge difference to an image. You know, just coaching your viewer's eye to your subject.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you had to sort of say the whole leading lines side of things, you know, there you've got you know, quite a big fissure that's going straight up. You've got the V of those lines coming in there. That's the only bit of real texture that's in the image. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's amazing. And even the one on the Amboseli, you know, that for me is like iconic. For some reason, that's the iconic wildlife image. You know, black and white, big landscape. This animal that's just loping across, I don't know, for me, that I've got goosebumps just thinking about it. You know, that for me is like amazing. I love it.
You know, this is another image from Amboseli, Quentin, and I agree with you. There's oftentimes on safari where you'd have the scene, and, you know, the first thing is about making sure the guests get the shot. And when I see that on the back of their cameras and I see their faces, I mean, it's fist bumps and high fives. And I must just tell you a quick story from the Okavango Delta. We had, you know, lions crossing water. That's like the holy grail. That's why you go to the Delta. You know, that's the shot. So we spend time with these lions every morning. We're out there getting them, because after 10 o'clock in the morning, you know what they do, sweet bugger all. So anyway, we get them. We get these two females and this male, and they're on the move. They've already crossed through some channels. And so anyway, the female, first one comes across. We shoot around, we get into perfect position, head on, get the shots, bang, 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 great. Other female comes across, fantastic. We know exactly where it's going to happen. The male has to come. I think, let me be the hero here. I'm going to film this for my guests, because I love to put together videos of the experience for the guests as well. And so I get into live view, got it all set up. This male comes through, boom, boom, boom. Guests are firing away. Fantastic. He comes through. Show me your images, show me your images. Everyone's got it. First, guys, I'm so stoked. I even took a video. Let me show you. And I hit play, and there's like nothing. So Kippy over here, the professional, ended up watching this beautiful male lion cross through the Okavango Delta, didn't take a single photograph, but also forgot to push record during this whole thing. So for those of you out there who've missed opportunities, just know that we also get it wrong somewhere along the line.
Beautiful.
And so it's just what the last one in the series is also about the nature, photographing the nature of the animal that you're photographing. So, for example, things like black-backed jackals and wild dogs, they're always on the move. They never keep still. So for me, opportunities to photograph them will be at low light when you can pan across and kind of capture that essence. And the same goes for a leopard. Whilst it's fantastic to see a leopard on top of a termite mound or out on an open cut grass plain in the Sabi Sands, for me, this speaks to the very nature of it. And this was in the Masai Mara. This was shot at 800 mils, just manually focusing through the grass here to get this shot. But it speaks to the nature. And this particular young female was quite nervous and skittish. And you can just see it in the posture, never mind the fact that she's bedded herself in a thick patch of grass. But getting this kind of a photograph for me is far more exciting than just your stock standard leopard standing out in the open. And I guess that also comes with a bit of experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I got a question here from Dave De Beer. How many photographers do you have on an average tour, and what is manageable from a group size?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. So we've from the early days, we've always said no more than 6 guests per guide, and we found that 6-in-1 ratio is good. So if we have a group that's 8 or 9 people, there will be 2 guides. Our largest group, outside of things on ships where we may have more people, but our largest groups are 12 guests with 2 guides, and that's what we do in the Masai Mara, and that's actually one of my favorite destinations, and I'm going to move into that next. So it's a perfect lead-in. But they're again split across 4 vehicles with a maximum of 3 guests per vehicle, and then the guides rotate through that. If you've been on a safari before, a safari vehicle with 10 people, someone's sitting in the middle, especially if it's winter, you've got no place to put your jacket.
Yeah.
And it can get quite cramped. You're shooting across people. You may not have the best view. So we try and have our tours between 3 and 6 guests. For me, the optimum both from a price point and a experience point of view is 4 guests and 1 guide. And the reason that I say that is that on a typical game viewer, all the guests can then be seated on the left-hand side of the vehicle with unobstructed views. So I would then sit behind the local guide, and the kind of game plan is to then position ourselves with the sightings on the left.
Andrew, you're breaking up there. I think we're struggling a little bit there with your connection, or maybe it's me. Andrew, you there?
So many destinations over the years, but there's always, that favorite place or a destination or trip that you get really, really excited about. And for me, I think returning to the Mara Conservancy in Kenya is one of those destinations. So, it's a place which is obviously synonymous with the Great Migration, but, this area has some of the biggest skies that you can ever imagine. And from a South African perspective, it's a destination that I wish so many more South Africans could experience because of our deep appreciation for the natural world. And so being able to see cheetah on the hunt in the middle of the day and being able to spend an entire day with them out here is incredible. They have some of the most impressive male lions that you will ever see. They are, I think in a period of 2 weeks, I think I saw about 80 different individuals, and many of those individuals we'd seen on multiple occasions. But yeah, more than 80 different individual lions over a period of 2 weeks. There are black rhino out in this part of the world as well. So to see a black rhino out in the open, from a South African perspective, that's almost unheard of. They like to hang around in the thickest of thickets, and very rarely provide any sort of photographic opportunities unless you're on foot, which you may then end up photographing them from a tree. And I think the big skies that are synonymous with East Africa are also a massive draw card out here. And then obviously during August and September, the Great Migration. And this is something which seems as though it's going to go ahead this year with very few spectators. And I'm actually quite excited about that, because I do feel that over the years, I've seen vehicle pressure influence the movement of these animals and add stress to the crossing points. But this year, I think is going to be slightly different. And it would be an absolute incredible privilege to actually witness the migration this year if you were based in Kenya and could get to the Mara Triangle to see this. And, you know, it is, I've been fortunate enough to return for the last 9 years, and I can tell you that there's something so special and so unique about seeing these animals come down, waiting for hours for them to actually start their crossing and then eventually taking that leap. And the excitement is palpable. The noise is incredible. This is one of my favorite photographs from the Mara, and it was actually taken from a high level viewpoint, but at 800 mils, it gives you the sense that you're actually right down low with these animals.
It's fantastic. I
to see them
love the graphic nature of that previous one.
Cliffs here. Quentin, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Your video is frozen, but your pictures are still going. So you keep going.
Okay. All right. And you can hear me as well then,
yes, yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. So yeah, just the experience of the migration, but then also the people, the Maasai culture. And Quentin, you know, we had a brief chat just before we went through, and I'm very conscious of hijacking platforms and pushing agendas and that sort of thing. But this was something that I chatted with Quentin about, and I thought I'd share with you all, is that, you know, the Mara Conservancy, the area where
and that looks like it's the end of that part of it. So let's wait and see if he comes back. Andrew,
I'm here.
Fantastic.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah. So go back to
where did I drop off there?
The Conservancy slide with the $20.
Got you.
So glad you got back there.
Okay, sorry guys, I don't know what's going on there.
That's cool.
So I was just saying that this is something that I chatted with Quentin about, and it's very close to our heart. And you can imagine that so many conservation areas, and this is not just in Kenya, it's throughout Africa at the moment, where funds for the conservation initiatives, talking about anti-poaching units, road maintenance, absolutely everything, are coming from tourism, and that is not happening this year. So the Mara Triangle Conservancy is an incredible conservancy as part of the Masai Mara Greater National Reserve, which is on the other side of the river. And these guys are obviously really short on cash for their operational expenses. So what we've done is we've started an initiative to help raise funds. We've got an ambitious target of about $100,000. We've so far raised about $35,000. And what we're doing is, for every $20 donated, people get an opportunity to be in the draw to win a trip for 2 to the Great Migration. Now, from a South African perspective, when trips are costed in US dollars and times are tough, it is difficult. However, for the cost, and I'm going to sound like a telemarketer here, but for just 345 Rand, that's based on today's local exchange rate, but it's a great cause. And for 350 Rand, you put your name in a hat to potentially win a trip for 2, because we know someone's going to be photographically inclined, but you're going to have a spouse and partner who you don't really want to say, listen, I'm just going to the Masai Mara for a week. I'll be back next week. Bring them along. So for 345 Rand, every $20 that you donate will get you an opportunity to win a trip for 2 for a 6-night, 7-day stay at the Wild Eye Mara camp in, I think the trip is running in October next year. So hopefully by then this COVID-19 issue will be underhand, and we would have been able to sort that out. So I would encourage you guys, the website there is savethemaraconservancy.com. Please do go check it out. You could stand a chance to join us in the Mara next year. And with that, Quentin, I'm going to end on this slide, which is where I would far rather be right now, out in the bush, under the stars, sleeping in a riverbed in the middle of the Zambezi Valley. And I'm really looking forward to getting back out there with guests and being able to share experiences like this with them again.
Fantastic. So I'll definitely going to enter for that. I think if everyone who's watching this has got any desire to photograph wildlife, you should definitely enter that. I'm going to be taking my wife, Roger Matron, with me on that trip. All right, moving on swiftly.
I think Roger would make it. But yeah, so thank you, Quentin. Thanks again for the opportunity, and I really appreciate it. I think it's fantastic to see the kind of community that you've built during a very difficult time, and just you know, the way that people are able to use technology these days to take a positive message, to inspire, and just to uplift. And I think you've done that really well with this community. So well done to you.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that. So just a question, I suppose, on your favorite animal that you enjoy shooting. Is there one, or is it just, you know, everything? I know it's a difficult one, so that's why I'm throwing it at you.
No, it is, and it's going to sound bizarre, but spotted hyena and black rhino for me, you know, they're always up to something. There's a bit of behavior and anticipation, especially with black rhino. There's attitude in there, but you know, you put on the flip side of that a leopard draped over a branch. I'll photograph it all day long, no problem whatsoever. Yeah. But yeah, I do enjoy photographing black rhino and spotted hyena.
And the most difficult animal that you've had to shoot? I mean, they all have their challenges.
Wild dogs, you know? No, they do, but I think wild dogs are probably one of the most difficult. You know, they're an absolute exposure nightmare. So you've got dark brown hazel eyes, you've got black patches, brown patches, white, and then, you know, in harsh light, their eyes just become black. And the only way to photograph them is really from eye level. Then you've got these massive radar ears, which if they're not tuned and pricked directly towards you, just look awkward. So the variables that need to come together to get a really great wild dog shot are quite challenging. So I'd say they're probably one of the most difficult animals to photograph. And that's if and when you do find them in the field. And I'd put cheetah on a similar level because that high brow line, you know, there's always shadow over those beautiful amber eyes. And so for me, my favorite time to photograph is actually after the sun is set. And nowadays with the camera's ability to run at high ISOs, you know, that's when you get these animals with beautiful moonball eyes. Mm-hmm. You've got soft, subtle light. If there's a bit of cloud cover and there's some orange and pinks in the sky, that reflects through into the scene. And so I've really enjoyed the way that tech has allowed us to shoot later in the day, after the light has actually faded. And then obviously couple that with a 400 2.8 and you can't go wrong.
Yeah, I think this is one of this and macro photography, I think are the two that definitely, you know, technology is your friend. You know, that sort of adage of, but you need to have this camera to be able to shoot this thing. I think in these types of situations, you know, a sensor that can do really high ISO without breaking up, a 2.8 400 or longer. That can really help you in those situations where the sun has gone down. You know, whether it's unfortunate or not, I think it is what it is. You know, if you're wanting to get those shots, you do need to have the equipment to do it.
I agree with you 100%. And the flip side of that, one of the greatest lessons is, you know, I know there's the whole exposed to the right kind of movement. And then the other side of it is actually underexposing to purchase shutter speed, number one, so you can shoot that scene at a lower ISO with a decent shutter speed. And then actually recovering, you know, bringing it back into Lightroom. Those files are so rich and there's so much information there that if you're underexposing by 2 full stops, just with the aim of purchasing shutter speed and shooting at a lower ISO, to be able to bring that back into Lightroom and then lift it by a stop, you know, there's the ability to do that. And so I agree with you that the advances in technology is just, if you go back, you just have to look at a coffee table book from, you know, the late 90s and look at some of the images that were out there, and incredible what the guys were able to do now. But we'd be looking at those sitting and bleating and moaning about the grain and it's not sharp enough and it's this, that, and the next thing. But the great thing about that is it goes to storytelling, and those images are powerful because of the story that they tell. So it's not necessarily about having the most technically proficient photographic skill set and getting the sharpest images. But secondly, to that point is macro photography. What a great place to go and learn and play around. Yeah. You know, put a little loom cube onto a tripod stand and try backlight, side light. There's so much stuff that you can do and play around with in your garden with a macro lens and a good light. So I would encourage people to go, especially during these times where you may not be able to get out into the parks that you would like to. And I'm hoping that that's, you know, interprovincial travel is going to open up a little bit, so we can get going back to Pilanesberg and those kind of destinations.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that the wildlife in your garden you know, there you can certainly practice. You're certainly not going to be able to stick a loom cube behind a lion, but the macro stuff, you can play with that. But you know, just going back to the story, you know, one of the things that your perspective has, I think, helped a lot of people on the chat, because they're just saying that, you know, you've changed my perspective on focal length and wildlife pictures, and that is that, you know, a close portrait image is not necessarily going to tell you a story. It will be able to give you a bit of personality in the eye and a scar, and that you can sort of go, okay, well, maybe this happened. But, you know, if you've got like the elephant walking across that plain and you go, well, where's he going? Where are the rest of them? You know, you start to build those stories, and it isn't really about the equipment. You know, it does help if you want to get those after the sunset or before the sun's come up. But at the end of the day, and it's regardless, it doesn't matter what genre it is. The story is really the key. Otherwise, it's just a picture. You know.
100%. And like I said, the risk that you have, and with editing and people being at home during this period. I don't know if you've seen it, there's a bit of a trend, but you know, if you don't have that story, like I said, you start to throw all of the tools in the toolbox at it. And so you try and use every slider, or you push it an extra 20% to try and make something out of it, when in actual fact, there's nothing there. And, you know, when I go through Lightroom sessions with guests and we look at images as thumbnails, I can pick out at a thumbnail, which is going to be the one to shoot, which is going to be the hero shot. And it's a posture, it's a ear position, it's a, whatever the case is. So I'm glad that I've been able to kind of stir some creative thinking from people. And, you know, it's not easy, because like I said, the wider you go, the more potentially distracting elements you bring into the frame. And so from a cropping perspective, I'm always looking for points of contrast, that, you know, a branch that's jutting in from the side here, or just a little highlight on the edge of the frame that's pulling my eye. And so if there's three things, it's going to be pulling back, thinking about your focal length a little bit more, thinking about the story that you're trying to tell. And if there isn't one there, then don't try and add it through post-processing, unless you're really proficient in Photoshop, then go wild, but call it art and not photography. And then the third one, maybe I opened a can of worms there, but the third one is, damn it, what was the third one? That was the main point that I wanted to make. From a storytelling perspective, come on.
Well, if you want to think about that, you think about that, and I'll go back to one that I forgot, but have now been reminded of. When you shoot, you know, underexposed, be that half a 2/3, full stop, 2 stops, whatever. It's something that I've noticed on a lot of the wildlife images that have been posted so far, and that is blown highlights. You know, for me, obviously shooting weddings, you have to see the detail in the dress. Otherwise, you know, you've lost that whole part of the story. And I think the same thing applies when it comes to shooting wildlife. You know, if you've got, you know, it's backlit, but the main or whatever it is blown out. For me, it detracts from the photo. But if you compensated for that and just pulled it back slightly, so there's a little bit of detail there, you can still open it up, and now you've got the full picture there. And I think that's also something that people need to consider. You know, when you've seen the image and in the LCD, and you go, oh, there's a bit of a problem there, to actually just dial it back a little bit, shoot it again, and then you can always edit later on to bring that out. I think that's one thing that people don't think too much about, and that is the highlights.
I agree 100%. So on that, I like a darker, more moody scene. I love underexposing, and I'll never forget a particular guest's face when I said underexposed by 3 full stops.
What?
Sorry, what? And so this is something that you should think about, what you're saying in the back of the LCD. Don't look at that image, look at the histogram still. And people know it because it's like in every single fundamentals of photography course, but look at the histogram. You will be amazed at how far you can push your underexposure before you start to clip on those blacks. And even then, if in some of those situations, those blacks where you're losing detail in the shadow is in the shadow and not part of your subject, and is in no way actually detracting from the overall image, technically it's not right, because you're losing detail in there. As part of your story, do you care? Not at all. It's the same as the reverse would be on the dress. You know, if you can't see those details and those subtle tones of white and the little detail in there, you've lost it. So you've got to bring it back in. And like I said, if you expose to the right and you're kind of blowing those highlights, you'll find that you're pulling the black slider back in because you've shifted the whole histogram over that way. And you're now going to tease it back. This is the opposite. You're going there and then you're lifting the whites. The other thing is tonal contrast. I very seldom use a global contrast adjustment. I'm always using that tone curve and teasing out the detail in there. And it's all about pushing and pulling your viewer's eye. The third point that I was going to kind of come to is from an equipment side of things, is it's not about the body. I mean, that gorilla photograph sitting with that gorilla in the middle there was taken with an RP, which is essentially Canon's, at that time, Canon's entry-level mirrorless camera, but it was paired with a great lens, and I knew how to use it and by underexposing and that sort of stuff. So I'm really not fussy about the gear that I shoot with. Good glass, good places where you're surrounded by rich opportunities. So, and maybe this is just something for people to think about is, for years we've gone and spent on camera equipment because the camera is going to make us a better photographer. Understand what the limitations of your existing gear are before you do that. And secondly, right now, when things do open up, there are some incredible specials for people to start traveling to places which usually charge dollars and you would never ever get to. Now's the time to think about actually putting yourself in an opportunity-rich environment to get those kind of photographs and the opportunities, rather than simply buying a new gear, going back to photograph that same pied kingfisher. Nothing's changed. You've got to push yourself out of that comfort zone as well. So maybe that's something that people can think about as we go into this next second half of the year, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the message for me, and it's always been a case of knowing your gear so that you can, first of all, muscle memory, you know where things are, and that button does ISO. And so you can quickly, without moving your eye from the viewfinder, you can do what you need to do and get the shot. But also then knowing your editing software and knowing that this particular camera model doesn't like to go 3 stops down, because if I did that, it would be stuck. But I know that if I then compensate a little bit here, that will work. So it's almost a case of, don't always go, okay, that's the perfect exposure, do it. Go down, go up, see what it does and how that camera reacts to the software and what can be pulled back, etc. And sometimes you'll find that you enjoy overexposing because it does something completely different. Other times you'll go the other way and you're exposing for the highlight, and you get this, let's say it's a like an egret or something like that, and there's just a sliver of light, but the rest is almost solid black. That also, it's an amazing image. And you go, oh, that's cool. Let's see how else we can shoot this. And that's where the passion and the fun comes into it, where you're not just going down the middle and 100%. It's correctly exposed, etc. You're playing and you're making mistakes and you're learning and becoming better,
And I think that comes back to that point that I made about taking something from representing, literally just capturing it as you see it, to creating a biased interpretation. And, when it comes to light, I would say, the best part of, or the longest technique or concept that I really took to grasp was exposure compensation. And once you mastered that, man, it's a whole new ballgame. And, like you said, with the technology of today, ISO 1600, I remember that years ago. Oh, you can never push it more than that. Those days are gone, but there's still people out there who, because when they started their journey on digital, that's what they were told. They kind of hang on to that. Things have changed. The game has changed. And as you know, it's going to change again in a couple of days' time. And it's a lovely time to be a photographer. There is so much opportunity, but just don't go and chase the tech. Understand what your existing limitations are before you go, because a new camera is not going to make you a better photographer. And probably with the stuff that's coming out now, it's probably going to expose your flaws as a photographer more than anything else. But it's a great time to be a photographer. It's a great time to go and play and break the mold. Like you've said, is not just stick to what you think is right and where you are. And that's often what we'll do in a vehicle, whether I've got a professional or someone who really knows what they're doing versus a beginner. Here you can kind of cement the concepts of aperture, shutter speed, ISO, exposure compensation. The pro is learning as they're going again, but you can help these people get their aperture settings right, whilst here you train, right, underexpose by 2 1/3, because this is what we're looking at, or throw a converter on. I want you to shoot that at 800 mils, not 400.
Yeah.
But why? So you're pushing people out of their comfort zones, but in a constructive manner, never ever prescriptive, or it's constructive criticism rather than kind of belittling and putting people down. They're there to have fun. You want to grow and have a great time on safari. So it's been able to juggle those personalities and those different kind of levels of understanding to help people get the most out of their experience. So, if you're going to buy a brand new camera, what better place to go and learn how to do it than in Madikwe or the Okavango Delta?
Absolutely. I like the Okavango Delta better, but
me too. I'm hoping that November trip is going to go ahead. We'll see what Cyril says.
Yeah, very cool. And I think the one thing before we wrap it up, and I think that's the value of having a guide that is skillful in being able to have two different sets of skill levels in a vehicle and maintain both of them. So for the pro, you're saying, no, put a 100%. Converter on there, etc. And for the other one saying, okay, so the aperture, what that means is it gives you the focused, you know what I mean? And you can have those discussions at the same time. And that, I think that's really where the value is. Just a quick one. When we're off here, if you wouldn't mind just jumping on the chat and putting in the link to the $20 donation, fee, etc. So we've had someone has asked about it, and I, for the life of me, couldn't remember it. So if we could just pop it in there, that'd be great. But other than that,
I will do so.
That was so cool. I really appreciate it. I loved the different angles, the different options, the different crops, the graphic nature of it. This speaks to me. So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
It's an absolute pleasure. And I think the thing is that, this kind of photography, some of my favorite images, if I put them up on Instagram, they're going to fall flat. Yeah. But I don't measure that from there. And it's something to get people to do. And photo clubs can be quite intimidating with these sort of things. It must be like this and that. Don't fall into that trap. Go with what you feel is good, because I've kind of got a niche where I love to photograph these animals in their environment, and it's quite different. There's very few people that photograph like that. And it wasn't because I went out to go and try and find something different. It's just, that's what appealed to me. So, find what appeals to you, stick at it, play with it, explore and create. Don't simply recreate.
Absolutely.
Quinton, thanks very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure. Have a fantastic afternoon.
Thank you. Cheers. Cheers, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.